unwind tonight. Let the cares and the noise of your world begin to fade, to recede into a distant hum. Allow your mind to detach from the immediate, from the lists and the worries that occupy your waking hours. We are about to begin a journey, not to a place you can find on a map, but to a time you can only visit in the quiet theater of your own thoughts. Let your mind drift backwards, slowly, gently, through the centuries. We are moving past the age of steam, past the age of enlightenment, further and further back, to an age of stone walls and quiet courtyards. We are not here for the grand narratives, the clash of swords, or the politics of kings. Our story is a quieter one, a history written not in ink, but in soil and petals. We are here to uncover the lost gardens buried beneath medieval castles. To understand these gardens, we must first understand the world that created them. The medieval period was a time of profound uncertainty. Central authority was often weak, and the landscape was a patchwork of feudal loyalties. Travel was perilous. The great forests that covered much of the land were not the managed woodlands we know today. They were vast, dark, and home to wolves, boars, and outlaws. The roads were little more than muddy tracks, often impassable in winter and dangerous at any time of year. For the people of this era, the world beyond their immediate community was a place of considerable risk. In this landscape, the castle was born. It was a response to this deep-seated need for security. A castle was a declaration in stone and timber, a symbol of power. But more than that, it was a promise of safety. It was a fortress, a place where a community could retreat and pull up the drawbridge against the dangers of the outside world. Imagine the feeling of security for those who lived within its walls. The immense thickness of the stone, the formidable height of the towers, the deep water of the moat, all conspired to create a sanctuary. The castle was a self-contained world, a microcosm of society, designed to withstand attack and to endure. But a fortress is only as strong as its ability to sustain its inhabitants. A siege was the ultimate test of a castle's strength. An attacking army would surround the castle, cutting off all access to the outside world. No food could come in, no supplies could be delivered. The goal was simple: to starve the defenders into submission. The lord of the castle would look out from his battlements and see an enemy army camped in his own fields, harvesting his crops for themselves. Inside, the stores of salted meat, dried fish, and grain would be carefully rationed. The water in the well was a precious resource. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the specter of hunger would become the greatest enemy of all. It is in this context of profound vulnerability that the first castle garden was born. It was an idea of radical importance, a living countermeasure to the threat of starvation. Within the protective embrace of the castle's defenses, a patch of land dedicated to growing food was not a luxury, it was a lifeline. It was a guarantee of some measure of fresh sustenance when all other sources were denied. This was the most primitive form of the castle garden, a humble, practical plot, a testament to the enduring human need to cultivate the land in the face of uncertainty. Consider the earliest of these castles, the Matan Bailey. These were not the grand stone fortresses we often imagine. They were structures of earth and wood, built quickly and efficiently. The motte was a large earthen mound, crowned with a wooden tower, the keep, where the lord and his family would live. At the base of the motte was the bailey, a larger, enclosed courtyard, protected by a wooden palisade and a ditch. This bailey was the heart of the castle community. It was a bustling, crowded, and often muddy space, filled with workshops, stables, barracks for the soldiers, and housing for the servants. Somewhere within this crowded bailey, a space had to be found for the garden. It would have been a constant struggle to protect it. Chickens, pigs, and geese would have roamed freely, and a stray animal could destroy a day's work in minutes. The garden would need its own small enclosure, perhaps a simple wattle fence made from woven hazel branches, to keep the animals at bay. The soil itself would have been poor, compacted by the constant traffic of people and animals. It would have to be improved, dug over and enriched with animal manure from the stables and whatever organic waste could be gathered from the kitchens. This early garden was a space of pure function. There was no room for aesthetics, no thought given to pleasing arrangements of color or form. The layout was dictated by need. Rows were straight, paths were narrow, and every square foot of fertile, protected soil was a precious commodity to be maximized. The crops grown were chosen for their hardiness and their ability to provide the maximum amount of calories. These were the workhorses of the vegetable world. Peas and broad beans were essential. They were easy to grow and, crucially, they could be dried and stored for months, providing a vital source of protein through the lean winter. They also had the benefit of enriching the soil with nitrogen, a fact that medieval gardeners understood through practical observation, even if they did not know the science behind it. Great beds of leeks, onions, and garlic would have been planted. These were the foundation of medieval cooking, the flavor base for the endless pottages and stews that were the staple diet for most people. They were robust, resistant to pests, and stored well in a cool, dark place. Hardy green vegetables, like cabbage and kale, were also vital. They could withstand the cold and could often be harvested late into the year, providing a source of fresh greens when little else was growing. And beneath the soil, the garden would be full of root vegetables. Turnips and parsnips were grown in great quantities. They were not the sweet, refined versions we know today, but tougher, more fibrous varieties. They were a dense source of energy that could be stored for long periods in a root cellar, a cool, underground chamber where they would be safe from frost and rot. Carrots were grown too, but they were not orange. They came in shades of purple, yellow, and white, their flavor more earthy and less sweet than their modern descendants. The knowledge of how to tend these gardens, how to make the most of a small and challenging plot of land, was not common. The agricultural wisdom of the Roman Empire had been largely lost in the centuries of upheaval that followed its collapse. The keepers of this ancient knowledge were the monasteries. In the quiet seclusion of their cloisters, monks pursued a life of prayer and work. Ora et labora. Part of that work was the meticulous copying of ancient texts in their scriptoriums, while their brethren in the fields were tending to the monastery's vast farms. The scholars were preserving the writings of Roman agronomists, like Columella and Palladius. They painstakingly copied these manuscripts onto expensive parchment, ensuring that the knowledge of crop rotation, soil enrichment, and pest control was not lost to time. The monasteries were great centers of stability and learning in a fractured world. Their gardens were often the most sophisticated and productive in the land. They had the time, the manpower, and the accumulated knowledge to practice advanced horticultural techniques. It was natural, then, that a powerful lord, seeking to improve the self-sufficiency of his own castle, would turn to the local monastery for help. A castle might invite a lay brother, a monk who specialized in gardening, to come and advise on the layout and management of the castle's garden. Imagine this quiet, robed figure walking the bailey with the castle's steward. He would survey the land, noting the way the sun moved across the sky, the areas that were sheltered from the wind, the places where water collected. He would bring with him the hard-won wisdom of the monastic tradition. He would explain the importance of rotating the crops each year, of not planting the same vegetables in the same bed year after year, to prevent the soil from becoming exhausted. He would demonstrate how to build raised beds, enclosing the soil with planks of wood or stones. This simple technique improved drainage, a crucial factor in a damp climate, and allowed the gardeners to create a deep, rich, and fertile soil medium that was easier to work. He would teach them the secret of the compost heap, the alchemical process of turning kitchen scraps, stable sweepings, and fallen leaves into a dark, crumbly, nutrient-rich material that would breathe new life into the tired soil. This was knowledge that was as valuable as any military secret. It was the knowledge of how to create life and sustenance from the earth. The daily life of the castle gardener was one of quiet, repetitive, and essential work. This was not a glorious role. It did not come with the prestige of a knight or the authority of the steward. It was a life of physical labor, governed by the rising and setting of the sun, and the slow, inexorable turning of the seasons. The gardener would be out at first light, his hands in the cool, damp earth. The work was demanding. Digging the heavy, often clay-rich soil with a simple iron-tipped wooden spade was back-breaking. Weeding was a constant, relentless task, done on hands and knees for hours on end. Water had to be hauled by hand in heavy wooden or leather buckets from the castle well, a finite and precious resource that had to be used sparingly. Yet there must also have been a profound satisfaction in this work. The gardener was a true creator, a facilitator of life. To take a tiny, dormant seed, place it in the earth, and to nurture it into a plant that would help to feed the entire community was a powerful act. The gardener would have understood the subtle language of the plants, the feel of the soil, the signs of the weather. His work was a constant, predictable rhythm in a world that was so often chaotic and violent. He He was the quiet, steady heart of the castle's resilience. As you settle deeper now, deeper into a state of rest, allow your mind to fully inhabit this early garden. Let go of the modern world and step into this small, enclosed space of green within the grey and brown of the Bailey. Construct the sensations of this place in your mind. Feel the rough texture of a wattle fence under your fingertips. Smell the complex, earthy scent of the damp ground after a brief spring shower. A scent mingled with the wood smoke from the kitchens and the faint animal smell from the stables. Hear the quiet sounds of the garden. There is no engine noise, no distant traffic. There is only the gentle hum of bees moving methodically between the white blossoms of the broad bean plants, the soft rustle of cabbage leaves in the breeze, and the distant, rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer from a nearby workshop. See the deep, rich, almost black soil of the raised beds, a stark contrast to the pale, packed earth of the pathways. See the vibrant green shoots of onions and leeks pushing their way determinedly towards the sun. This was a space of quiet purpose, a hidden world of green within the grey stone of the fortress. It was not a place of beauty in the way we might understand it. Its beauty lay in its function, in its promise of survival. This was the heart of the castle, a garden born not of leisure, but of necessity. Its story is buried deep, waiting for us to unearth it. Let your thoughts drift with the slow, steady, patient work of the medieval gardener, and allow yourself to find a deep and profound rest in the quiet, simple purpose of this lost world. If you wish to continue these journeys into the quiet corners of the past, to find more stories that soothe the mind and encourage rest, then please subscribe to the channel. There are many more lost worlds to explore together. Let us now journey deeper into the heart of the castle's daily life, into a space of immense practical importance, a living pantry that provided the very flavors and textures of the medieval table. Breathe in, and in your mind, let the air become thick with the scent of damp earth and growing things. We are entering the kitchen garden, known in the grander households by its Norman French name, the potager. This was the domain of the cook, but it was brought to life by the tireless hands of the gardener. It was a fortress, not of stone, but of flavors, a bastion of green that stood between the castle's inhabitants and the monotonous, unvarying blandness of a diet based solely on salted meats, dried fish, and coarse bread. The design and layout of a kitchen garden was a testament to orderly logic and hard-won experience. It could not be a chaotic jumble of plants. It had to be a well-managed, efficient space, designed to produce the maximum amount of food in the limited area available within the castle's walls. Its first and most essential feature was its enclosure. The bailey of a medieval castle was a busy semi-agricultural space. Chickens, prized for their eggs and meat, would have scratched in the dirt. Geese, acting as noisy sentinels, would have wandered freely. Even pigs, the great recyclers of kitchen waste, might have been allowed to roam at certain times. To a hungry animal, a bed of tender young lettuce or sweet carrot tops was an irresistible feast. Therefore, the kitchen garden had to be securely enclosed. This was often done with a wattle fence, a beautiful and practical structure woven from flexible branches of hazel or willow between sturdy, upright posts. This fence was permeable to the wind and sun, but formed a dense barrier against hungry livestock. In a wealthier castle, or one where stone was abundant, this fence might be replaced by a low, dry stone wall. This provided an even more permanent barrier and had the added benefit of absorbing the sun's heat during the day and radiating it back at night, creating a slightly warmer microclimate that could protect tender plants from a late spring frost. Within this protected enclosure, the garden was typically divided into a series of raised beds. This was a crucial technique. Simply digging into the compacted, often poor-quality soil of the bailey would have yielded disappointing results. Instead, the gardeners would construct rectangular frames from rough-hewn timber planks or from stones, and fill them with a carefully prepared mixture of the best available topsoil, sand for drainage, and vast quantities of rich, dark compost and manure. This created a deep, fertile, and well-drained growing medium, the ideal environment for vegetable roots to thrive. These raised beds were separated by narrow paths. These paths were just wide enough for a gardener to walk and to push a simple wooden wheelbarrow. They would be made of whatever material was locally available: packed earth, tamped down until it was hard and firm, fine gravel brought up from a riverbed, sand, or in coastal areas, even crushed seashells, which would have crunched pleasingly underfoot. This design was eminently practical. It allowed the gardeners to tend to the plants in the beds, watering and harvesting without ever stepping on the precious soil, which would have compacted it and harmed the plant's roots. It created a garden that was a model of order and accessibility. Within these beds grew the foundational crops of the medieval diet. The allium family was king. Great quantities of onions, leeks, and garlic were cultivated. These were not the large, uniform globes we see today. Medieval onions were often smaller and more elongated, their flavor more pungent. Leeks were a particular staple, able to withstand cold weather and remain in the ground for harvesting throughout the winter. Garlic, with its powerful flavor and recognized medicinal properties, was grown both for the kitchen and the physic garden. These three vegetables were the flavor base for almost everything. They were sweated in lard or butter to begin a stew, roasted alongside a joint of meat, or boiled in the great cauldron to create the thin, brothy pottage that was the daily meal for the castle's servants and men. Next in importance were the brassicas. Cabbages, with their dense, heavy heads, were a vital crop. They could be harvested late into the autumn and, if stored correctly in a cool cellar, could last for many months. Kale, or colewort, as it was often known, was even hardier. Its tough, dark green leaves could be picked right through the winter, even from under a light blanket of snow, providing essential nutrients at the bleakest time of year. These greens were not eaten in crisp salads. They were typically boiled for a very long time, until they were soft and pulpy, often in the same pot as a piece of salted pork or bacon, the flavors mingling to create a simple, warming, and filling meal. The soil of the raised beds was also perfect for root vegetables. Turnips and parsnips were grown in abundance. They were a dense and reliable source of calories, and their natural sweetness was prized. They were roasted in the embers of the fire until their skins were blackened and their flesh was soft and sweet, or they were mashed or added to thickened stews. The carrots of the kitchen garden would be a surprise to a modern eye. They were not bright orange. That variety was not developed until much later. Instead, they were slender roots of purple, yellow, or a pale, creamy white. Their flavor was more intensely earthy, less sugary than the carrots we are used to. And then there were the legumes, the providers of protein. Peas and beans were grown up rustic trellises made of pea sticks, the branched twigs of hazel or other trees. In the summer, they were eaten fresh, a sweet and welcome treat, but their true value lay in their ability to be dried. At the end of the season, the pods were left to mature on the vine until they were dry and rattling. They were then harvested and shelled, and the hard, dry peas and beans were stored in cloth sacks. These pulses would last all winter and could be soaked and boiled to make thick, nutritious soups and the famous peas pudding, a savory staple of the medieval diet. But the kitchen garden was not just about survival. It was also about making the food palatable, about transforming simple ingredients into something enjoyable. This was the role of the herb garden, which was often a specific, dedicated section within the larger potager. Here, a host of aromatic plants was cultivated with care. Parsley, with its fresh, green flavor, was used everywhere. Sage, with its slightly dusty, savory aroma, was considered the essential partner for pork and goose. Rosemary, its pine-like fragrance, a scent of the warm south, was used with lamb. Thyme, with its tiny leaves and intense perfume, was added to soups and stews. These herbs were the soul of the kitchen, the simple tools a cook could use to add variety and depth to a limited range of ingredients. Other herbs were grown for more than just their flavor. Mint, with its clean, sharp scent, was a multi-purpose plant. It was used in sauces, but it was also a strewing herb. In an age before modern sanitation, the floors of a castle's great hall could be unpleasant. They were covered in rushes or straw, which would absorb spills and waste. Fresh mint would be scattered amongst the rushes, and as people walked on it, the fragrant oils would be released, masking less pleasant odors. Borage was another favorite, grown for its beautiful, star-like blue flowers. These flowers were floated in cups of wine to make them look festive, and the plant was believed to engender courage and lift the spirits. The work of tending this garden was a year-long cycle of demanding labor, requiring skill, foresight, and a deep, practical understanding of the natural world. The head gardener was not a simple laborer. He was a craftsman. His knowledge was encyclopedic. He knew, from experience, which plants grew well together. He knew that planting strong-smelling rosemary or hyssop near his cabbages could help to confuse the white butterflies that laid their devastatingly hungry caterpillars on the leaves. He knew how to save the seeds from his best and strongest plants at the end of the season, carefully drying and storing them to ensure a good harvest for the following year. The daily rhythm of the garden was intimately connected to the rhythm of the kitchen. Every morning, the cook would decide on the day's meals, and a kitchen boy or an undergardener would be sent out with a sharp knife and a woven basket, or trug. They would harvest exactly what was needed for that day. No more, no less. The leeks would be pulled from the earth, their roots still trailing soil. The cabbage would be cut from its stalk, its leaves still crisp with morning dew. The bunch of parsley would be fragrant and fresh. This was the ultimate form of seasonal eating, a direct and immediate link between the soil and the table that is almost impossible to replicate today. The seasons dictated the gardener's work. Spring was a time of intense preparation, of turning the soil, digging in the winter's accumulation of compost, and carefully sowing the seeds in neat, straight rows. It was a time of hope and of anxiety, of watching the weather for a late, destructive frost. Summer was a relentless war on two fronts. The war against the weeds that constantly threatened to choke the vegetables, and the war against the pests, a battle fought by hand, by squashing caterpillars and picking snails off the leaves one by one. It was also the season of watering, of hauling endless heavy buckets from the well during any dry spell. Autumn was the great crescendo of the year, the time of the harvest, when the bounty of the garden was gathered and prepared for storage. Onions were plaited into long ropes to be hung from the rafters. Root vegetables were carefully dug up and buried in boxes of sand in the cool darkness of the root cellar. Beans and peas were threshed and dried. Winter was a quieter, though not an idle, time. It was a time for pruning the fruit bushes, for turning the great compost heap to encourage its decay, for mending tools and fences, and for planning the layout of the garden for the year to come. Allow your mind to wander now, to walk the narrow paths of this orderly, productive space. Feel the rough, waxy texture of a cabbage leaf between your fingers. Crush a leaf of rosemary and inhale its sharp, clean, resinous scent. See the vibrant, almost electric green of the pea vines as they climb their rustic supports, reaching for the sun. This was a space of constant, quiet productivity. It was the living, breathing engine room of the castle's kitchen, a testament to the ingenuity and sheer hard work of the people who cultivated it. The diverse and subtle flavors of the medieval world were born here, in this small, enclosed, and carefully managed patch of earth. This was a lost garden that did more than just feed a community. It nourished it, giving it a taste of freshness and life in a world of stone. If this journey into the flavors of the past has brought you a sense of peace, consider subscribing to continue our explorations. There are many more stories to uncover. For now, let the image of this productive, life-giving garden fill your mind and allow yourself to drift into a deep and well-earned rest. Let us now move from the familiar, earthy sense of the kitchen garden, with its promise of sustenance, to a different corner of the castle grounds. We will step through a small, unassuming gate, perhaps set into an old stone wall, and enter a space that was quieter, more mysterious, and in many ways, held a far greater power. We are entering the physic garden, the living apothecary of the medieval castle. Here, the plants were not cultivated for robust flavor or to fill an empty stomach. They were grown for their hidden virtues, their ability to heal, to soothe, to mend, and sometimes to enter the shadowy realms of poison. This was the domain of the castle's healer, who might have been the lady of the household, a wise woman from a nearby village, or a visiting monk with specialized knowledge. It was a place where botany and medicine, faith and folklore were deeply and inextricably intertwined. The physic garden was almost always a place of seclusion. It might be found in a small sheltered courtyard, far from the noise and smells of the stables and the blacksmith's forge. Sometimes it was located near the castle's chapel, its quiet, contemplative atmosphere a fitting companion to a place of prayer. This seclusion was practical. It protected the valuable and sometimes dangerous plants from being disturbed by the castle's general populace, but it also added to the garden's aura of mystery, marking it as a space set apart, a place of specialized and powerful knowledge. Its layout was one of deliberate order, often reflecting the very philosophy of medieval medicine. While the kitchen garden was arranged for convenience, the physic garden was often a diagram of belief. A central path might run one way, crossed by another, dividing the garden into 4 distinct sections. This was no accident. This cross shape was a constant, visible symbol of the Christian faith, but it also mirrored the core of medieval medical theory, the doctrine of the four humours. This ancient belief, inherited from the Greeks, held that the human body was composed of four essential fluids, or humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Each humour was associated with an element, a season, and a quality. Blood was associated with air, spring, and the quality of being hot and moist. Phlegm was linked to water, winter, and being cold and moist. Yellow bile corresponded to fire, summer, and the qualities of hot and dry. And black bile was tied to the earth, autumn, and the state of being cold and dry. A healthy person was one in whom these four humours were in perfect balance. Illness, therefore, was believed to be the result of an imbalance, an excess, or a deficiency of one of these humours. A person with a persistent cough and running nose, for example, was thought to be suffering from an excess of cold and moist phlegm. The task of the healer was to restore balance, and the physic garden was the chest of tools for this very purpose. Every plant within it was classified according to this same system. A plant might be considered hot and dry, like mustard or nettle, or cold and moist, like willow or violet. To treat the ailment of excess phlegm, the healer would select a hot and dry herb to counteract the imbalance. Medicine was a delicate art of opposites, of using the properties of the natural world to gently nudge the body back into a state of harmony. Another guiding principle was at play in this garden, a philosophy known as the doctrine of signatures. This was the belief that God, in his infinite wisdom, had placed a clue, or a signature, on each plant to indicate its intended use. One simply had to learn how to read this divine language. A plant with heart-shaped leaves might be used for ailments of the heart. The gnarled, jointed appearance of Solomon's seal root suggested its use in mending broken bones. The most famous example was lungwort, a plant with leaves that are covered in small, pale spots, thought to resemble a diseased lung. It was therefore the primary remedy for coughs, bronchitis, and other respiratory troubles. Eyebright, a delicate little flower with a pattern on its petals that looked like a tiny bloodshot eye, was, as its name suggests, the sovereign remedy for all manner of eye infections and irritations. The logic was simple and elegant. Nature itself was the ultimate guide to its own secrets. Let us walk the narrow paths of this fragrant, living pharmacy and become acquainted with some of its inhabitants. One would find great clumps of comfrey, a plant with large, hairy leaves and drooping purple flowers. It was known by the common name knitbone, a direct and accurate description of its primary use. The roots and leaves were crushed to a pulp to create a thick poultice, which was then applied to sprains, fractures, and broken bones to speed their healing. Nearby, there would certainly be yarrow, with its feathery leaves and flat-topped clusters of white flowers. Its ancient name was Herba militaris, the military herb, because its leaves could be crushed and placed on a wound to staunch the flow of blood. For fevers and pains, the garden offered several remedies. Feverfew, a small, daisy-like flower, was grown to treat headaches and migraines. Its leaves were chewed or made into an infusion. The bark of the willow tree was known to contain properties that could reduce both fever and inflammation, a natural source of the chemical that would one day become aspirin. Meadowsweet, a plant with a sweet almond-like scent, had similar pain-relieving qualities. The garden also tended to the mind and the spirit. In an age of hardship and uncertainty, melancholy was a common affliction. The healer would turn to St. John's wort. Its sunny, yellow flowers, which bloomed around the summer solstice, were believed to hold the power of the sun. It was thought to drive away darkness, both spiritual and mental. It was made into a tincture or an oil and used to lift the spirits and ward off despair. For troubled sleep or anxious nerves, there was valerian. The flowers are delicately scented, but the root, when dug up, has a pungent, earthy smell. It was this root that was prized, dried and made into a tea or tincture to calm the nerves and bring on a deep and restful sleep. Lemon balm, with its wonderful, fresh citrus scent, was known as the gladdening herb, thought to bring joy to the heart. The art of the healer extended far beyond simply knowing which plant to use. It involved a deep understanding of the plant's entire life cycle. The harvesting of medicinal herbs was a precise and sometimes ritualistic practice. It was believed that the potency of a plant was influenced by the time of day, the weather, and even the phase of the moon. Leaves were often gathered in the morning, after the dew had dried but before the sun had become too hot. Flowers were picked at the peak of their bloom, usually around midday. Roots, where the plant's energy was stored, were best harvested in the autumn, after the plant had died back for the winter. Once harvested, the herbs were brought to the still room, a dedicated space for their preparation and storage. This room would be cool, dry, and airy, and its rafters would be a forest of drying plants. Herbs would be tied into small bunches and hung upside down, a gentle rustling sound filling the air as they slowly desiccated. The room would be filled with a complex, concentrated perfume, the combined scents of 100 different plants. Once perfectly dry, the leaves, flowers, and roots would be stripped from their stems and stored in earthenware pots or cloth bags, carefully labeled, ready for use. From these dried herbs, the healer would create their remedies. The simplest was an infusion, what we would call a tea, made by steeping the delicate leaves and flowers in hot water. For tougher materials like bark and roots, a decoction was needed, where the plant matter was simmered in water for a longer period to extract its properties. Tinctures were made by steeping herbs in wine or ale, the alcohol acting as a solvent and a preservative, and for external use, there were salves and ointments. These were created by gently heating herbs in a fat, such as lard or sheep's tallow, or in beeswax, and then straining the mixture. The resulting substance was a potent, herb-infused balm that could be applied to wounds, rashes, and sore muscles. Yet this garden of healing also held a darker, more secret side, for alongside the gentle comfrey and chamomile grew other, more dangerous plants. These were the poisons, cultivated with great care and respect for their deadly power. Foxglove, with its tall, elegant spires of bell-shaped purple flowers, was known to be a powerful heart stimulant. In tiny, carefully measured doses, it could save the life of someone with a failing heart, but a slightly larger dose could be fatal. Henbane and deadly nightshade, with its shiny black berries, were sources of powerful sedatives and muscle relaxants, but they were also classic poisons, capable of causing delirium and death. The knowledge of these plants was a source of immense power. The healer who knew how to use them held the ability not only to cure, but also to harm. This knowledge was a heavy responsibility, guarded jealously and passed down only to the most trusted apprentices. The physic garden was a place of profound connection between people and the green world. It represented a deep and intuitive understanding that the earth provided not only the means for our survival, but also the means to mend our bodies and soothe our minds. It was a place of quiet hope within the formidable walls of the castle, a testament to a time when medicine grew directly from the soil, guided by tradition, observation, and faith. As you continue to rest, let your mind settle in this tranquil, fragrant space. Sense the quiet, purposeful atmosphere, the air rich with the scents of lavender, chamomile, and mint. Acknowledge the careful, knowledgeable hands of the healer, moving among the beds, their skill a silent, powerful force. This was nature's own pharmacy, a lost garden whose legacy still echoes in the folk remedies we remember and the modern medicines we derive from plant compounds. It is a potent reminder of the quiet, persistent, healing power of the natural world. If you have found this exploration of the past to be a source of calm and rest, consider subscribing to our channel. There are many more quiet histories to share. For now, let the peace of the physic garden be your own, and drift into a deep and healing sleep. Let us now, with our minds quiet and receptive, leave the worlds of pure utility. We will move away from the practicalities of the kitchen plot and the vital remedies of the physic garden, and step through a small, often hidden gate. This gate might be of heavy studded oak, or perhaps a lighter, more decorative work of wrought iron. It is almost always locked, its key held by the lady of the castle or her most trusted servant. As we pass through it, we are entering a world of beauty, fragrance, and deliberate escape. We are setting foot in the pleasure garden, the private sanctuary of the castle's lord and lady. Known in the language of the court as a herba or a pleasance, this garden was not designed with the needs of the body in mind. Its purpose was entirely different. It was created to delight the senses, to quiet the mind, and to soothe the soul. It was a fragment of paradise, conceived and cultivated as an enclosed and protected haven within the formidable, unyielding stone walls of the fortress. The location of the pleasure garden was chosen with great care. It was never placed in the busy, open space of the outer bailey. Instead, it was tucked away in the most sheltered and private part of the castle, perhaps in a small inner courtyard, cradled between the great hall and the family's private chambers. It would be protected from the prevailing winds by the high stone walls that surrounded it. These walls did more than just provide shelter. They created a unique microclimate. The stone would absorb the warmth of the sun during the day and radiate it back slowly through the cool of the evening and night. This gentle, retained heat could extend the flowering season of delicate plants and protect them from the sudden chill of an unexpected frost. The enclosure was paramount. It was a physical barrier, ensuring that the garden remained the exclusive domain of the noble family and their most honored guests. It kept out the noise, the smells, and the general clamor of the castle's daily life. The sounds of the blacksmith's hammer, the shouting of the guards, the clatter from the kitchens, all of these would be muffled and softened by the thick walls. But the enclosure was also deeply symbolic. It was a physical manifestation of the hortus conclusus, the enclosed garden from the biblical Song of Solomon. This image was a powerful and pervasive metaphor in the medieval mind for the purity and sanctity of the Virgin Mary. The walled garden, with its locked gate, was a space of protected innocence, a sanctuary from the perceived sin and chaos of the wider world. To enter it was to step into a state of grace, a place of peace and order. Inside these walls, the design was one of formal, geometric beauty. Unlike the purely functional rows of the kitchen garden, the pleasance was an exercise in artistry. At its heart, one would often find a central feature, a focal point for contemplation. This might be a small fountain, carved from stone, its gentle, rhythmic splashing the only constant sound in the garden's quiet. The sound of moving water was considered deeply calming, a soothing balm for a troubled mind, and it symbolized the life-giving waters of paradise. If a fountain was too great an expense, a simple stone-lined well, with a decorative wooden or iron wellhead, would serve a similar purpose. Around this central point, the garden would be laid out. The paths were meticulously maintained, laid with materials chosen for their texture and sound. Fine, pale gravel, brought from a river, would make a soft, crunching sound underfoot. Sand, or even crushed seashells in a castle near the coast, would provide a different sensory experience. These paths would often form a simple, elegant pattern, perhaps a cross dividing the garden into 4 square beds, or a circle within a square, reflecting the medieval fascination with sacred geometry. The earth and the heavens. Built against the warm sun-facing walls, one would find the garden's seating. The most characteristic feature of the pleasure garden was the turf bench. This was a living seat, constructed from a base of earth and stone, and topped with a thick layer of springy, fragrant turf. These benches were often planted with low-growing aromatic herbs like chamomile or creeping thyme. When the lord or lady sat down, their weight would gently crush the leaves of these herbs, releasing a cloud of sweet, clean fragrance into the air. It was a simple, yet ingenious, piece of sensory design. Simple stone benches might also be present, their coolness a welcome relief on a hot summer's day. To create a sense of intimacy and shade, the garden would often feature an arbor or a pleached alley. An arbor was a rustic archway or a shaded walkway built from wood, over which climbing plants were trained. A pleached alley was an even more sophisticated structure. 2 rows of young flexible trees, like lime or hornbeam, were planted opposite each other. As they grew, their branches were carefully woven together overhead to form a living tunnel of leaves and branches. To walk through one of these green tunnels was to be in a space that was both indoors and out, the sunlight filtering down through the canopy of leaves, creating a dappled, shifting light on the path below. These structures were living architecture, changing with the seasons. The true soul of the pleasure garden, however, was its plants, and they were chosen above all for their fragrance and their beauty. This was a garden for the nose as much as for the eye. The rose was the undisputed queen of the pleasance. These were not the hybrid teas of the modern era, prized for their long stems and flawless form. Medieval roses were often sprawling, shrubby plants, but their blooms possessed an intense, intoxicating perfume that can be hard to find today. The red rose of Lancaster, the Rosa Gallica, was a common sight, its deep crimson petals a symbol of earthly love, but also of the blood of Christian martyrs. The white rose of York, the Rosa alba, its pure white petals surrounding a boss of golden stamens, was a potent symbol of the Virgin Mary's purity. Sharing the stage with the rose was the lily. The tall, stately Madonna lily, with its large, trumpet-shaped white flowers, would add a vertical element to the beds. Its perfume was heavy, sweet, and filled the air, particularly in the stillness of the evening. Like the white rose, it was a symbol of purity and innocence. The beds around these larger plants would be filled with a rich tapestry of smaller flowers. Violets, with their sweet, delicate scent, would carpet the ground in early spring, their humble, low-growing nature a symbol of humility. Primroses, columbines, and irises would add their own forms and colors to the display, and everywhere there were the herbs chosen for their scent. Lavender was essential, its silvery green foliage and spikes of purple flowers releasing a clean, calming aroma whenever they were brushed against. Rosemary was grown not for the kitchen, but for its pine-like fragrance and its association with remembrance. Hyssop, mint, and lemon balm would be planted along the edges of the paths. Pinks, a type of dianthus, were a particular favorite, their frilled clove-scented flowers filling the air with a spicy sweetness. The goal was to create a complex and layered perfume, a sensory experience that changed with the time of day and the passing of the seasons. This beautiful, fragrant space was the stage for the most private and refined aspects of courtly life. It was here, away from the crowded public space of the great hall, that the lord and lady could have a truly private conversation. It was the ideal setting for courtship, a romantic backdrop where a knight could present his lady with a poem he had composed, or where lovers could exchange quiet words, their conversation unheard by anyone but the birds in the trees. It was a place of quiet leisure. The ladies of the household would bring their embroidery out into the garden on a sunny afternoon, their needles flashing as they worked on a great tapestry. The lord might sit with his steward to discuss the castle's accounts, or play a game of chess on a small table set up in the shade of an arbor. It was a place for reading, for those who were literate and wealthy enough to own a precious hand-copied book. Music was a natural companion to the garden's beauty. A lone musician might be asked to play a lute or a viol, their gentle, melancholic melodies drifting on the air, mingling with the sound of the fountain and the buzzing of the bees. It was, in essence, an outdoor room, a space for all the quiet, civilized pursuits that were so difficult to find space for in the dark and crowded confines of the castle keep. The pleasure garden was a profound statement. In an age of frequent warfare, disease, and hardship, the creation of a space dedicated solely to beauty and peace was an act of profound optimism. It was an attempt to impose a small piece of human and divine order on a chaotic world. It was a living, breathing work of art, a collaboration between the gardener's skill and the beauty of nature. Close your eyes and let your mind fully construct this noble escape. Feel the unexpected warmth radiating from a stone wall. Hear the gentle, repetitive splash of water from a central fountain. Inhale the complex perfume of the air, a mixture of rose, lavender, and the sweet scent of sun-baked earth. This was a garden designed to quiet the restless mind and to delight the human heart. It was a rare and precious pocket of softness, beauty, and peace in a hard stone world. A lost garden that speaks to us of the timeless human need to create our own small sanctuaries of calm. If this tranquil journey has helped to quiet your own mind, I invite you to subscribe and join us for more stories from the past. For now, let the peace of this forgotten garden be your own. Allow it to envelop you and drift into a deep and untroubled sleep. Our journey now takes us beyond the immediate, high walls of the inner castle. We move to the outer edges of the cultivated spaces, to the orchard and the vineyard. These were not the small, intensely managed gardens tucked away in private courtyards. These were larger, more expansive landscapes of production, often situated in a sunny, protected swath of land between the inner and outer curtain walls, or sometimes in a place of great trust, spilling onto the sun-drenched slopes just outside the fortress itself. The orchard and the vineyard were not about the day-to-day needs of the kitchen. They represented a far grander vision. They were a long-term investment in the castle's future, a source of sweetness, sustenance, and most importantly, a reliable and abundant supply of drink. The decision to establish an orchard was an act of profound foresight and patience. A fruit tree is not like a cabbage or a beanstalk, which yields its produce within a single season. A newly planted sapling takes years to mature, years to gather its strength from the soil and the sun, before it is ready to bear a significant crop. Planting an orchard was therefore a commitment made by a lord, not just for his own table, but for the tables of his children and grandchildren. It was a way of putting down roots, of solidifying a family's claim to the land, a living testament to their intention to remain. The trees for this orchard were selected with immense care. Apples were, by a very wide margin, the most common and most vital fruit. The sheer number of apple varieties cultivated in the medieval period was staggering, a rich biodiversity that has been largely lost to the modern world of standardized agriculture. They came in all shapes, sizes, colors, and flavors. Some were sweet and crisp, destined to be eaten fresh from the tree, a rare seasonal luxury for the lord's family. Others were prized for their keeping qualities, tough-skinned varieties that, if stored carefully in a cool, dark cellar, layered with straw, could last for months into the winter. There were also cooking apples, whose firm flesh would hold its shape when baked in the embers of the fire, or cooked into a thick sweet sauce. But the vast majority of the apples grown were not for eating at all. They were destined for the cider press. Cider was the staple drink for all but the highest echelons of society. Water from wells and rivers was often unsafe to drink, carrying the risk of disease. Wine was an expensive luxury, often imported and reserved for the nobility. Ale required grain, which was the primary source of bread. But cider was a democratic drink, made from the abundant and free harvest of the orchard. To make the best cider, a blend of apples was needed. There were the sharps, which provided the acidic bite, the sweets, for sugar and alcohol content, and the bittersweets, or bitter sharps, complex, tannin-rich apples that gave the final drink its body and depth. Pears were also widely cultivated, their elegant, bell-like shape and meltingly sweet flavor making them a favorite for the high table. They were eaten fresh as a great delicacy, or baked into pies and tarts. A special variety known as the warden pear was grown specifically for cooking, a hard, almost inedible fruit when raw, but which, when slowly baked for hours in wine and spices, would transform into a tender, deep red, and exquisitely flavored dessert. Pears, like apples, could also be fermented, creating a light, alcoholic drink known as perry. The orchard would also contain plums and their smaller, sharper cousins, damsons. These would be cooked down to make thick preserves and jams, or used as the filling for pies and pasties. Cherries were a fleeting and precious treat, their brief season in the height of summer a cause for celebration. In the warmest and most southerly castles, one might even find quince trees, their hard, lumpy, and intensely aromatic golden fruit, unusable when raw, but which, when cooked with honey or sugar, produced a thick, fragrant rose-colored paste known as a membrillo, or marmalade, which could be stored for months. This entire productive landscape was a carefully managed environment. The trees were planted in neat, orderly rows, a decision that was both aesthetic and intensely practical. The wide avenues between the rows, known as alleys, made the harvesting of the fruit easier and, just as importantly, allowed for another form of agriculture to take place. The grass that grew beneath the trees was not wasted, it was a pasture. Flocks of sheep would be allowed to graze in the orchard, their constant nibbling keeping the grass short and tidy, far more efficiently than any scythe. Their manure, in turn, would fertilize the soil, returning nutrients to the earth and feeding the very trees under which they sheltered. It was a perfect, self-sustaining system. The skill of the castle's head gardener was on full display in the orchard. One of the most vital skills was the art of grafting, a technique that must have seemed like a form of natural magic. The gardener knew that planting a seed from a favorite apple would not necessarily produce a tree with the same quality of fruit. To guarantee the desired result, he would perform a delicate operation. He would take a cutting, a small twig known as a scion, from a mature tree known to produce excellent fruit. Then, he would take a young, hardy sapling, grown for the strength of its roots, known as the rootstock. With a sharp knife, he would make a precise cut in the rootstock and carefully insert the scion, binding the two together tightly with strips of cloth or leather and sealing the wound with a mixture of clay and moss. If the graft was successful, the two separate pieces of wood would fuse together, and the scion would grow into a new branch, and eventually a new tree that would bear the exact same fruit as its parent. This was a highly skilled craft, a form of living science passed down from master to apprentice. Pruning was another essential annual task. In the depths of winter, when the trees were dormant and their branches were bare skeletons against the grey sky, the gardener would go out with his sharpest knife and saw. This was not a random hacking of branches. It was a careful, considered sculpting of the tree. He would remove any dead or diseased wood. He would cut out branches that were crossing over each other, creating a tangled, unhealthy mess. His goal was to open up the center of the tree, to allow air and sunlight to penetrate deep into the canopy. This improved the health of the tree, prevented fungal diseases, and, most importantly, encouraged it to produce more and better fruit in the coming year. Where the climate allowed, the castle might also boast a vineyard. This was a source of immense prestige. To produce one's own wine was a definitive statement of wealth and status. It showed that a lord had not only the right kind of facing well-drained land, but also the capital to invest in a venture that required years of intense labor before it produced a single drop of drinkable wine. Wine was the drink of the nobility, the church, and of celebration. It was central to the Christian rite of the Eucharist, and so every castle, chapel, and nearby monastery required a steady supply. The work in the vineyard was even more relentless than in the orchard, a year-long cycle of back-breaking tasks. In the cold of late winter, the vines had to be brutally pruned, cutting back almost all of the previous year's growth to leave just a few promising buds on a gnarled ancient stem. In the spring, as the new, vibrant green shoots began to grow, they had to be carefully tied to a framework of wooden posts and trellises, guiding their growth upwards towards the sun. Throughout the long, hot days of summer, workers would have to move through the rows again and again, tucking in stray shoots and plucking away some of the leaves to ensure that the nascent bunches of grapes were exposed to the ripening rays of the sun. The harvest, or the vendange, which took place in the early autumn, was a time of intense, communal labor. Everyone who was available, from the castle's own servants to workers from the surrounding villages, would be called upon to help. The work was hard, bending for hours to carefully cut the heavy bunches of grapes from the vines with small, curved knives. But it was also a time of festivity and release, the culmination of a year's worth of hope and hard work. The harvested grapes were rushed to the winepress. This was often a huge, circular stone trough, housed in a dedicated building. The grapes would be piled in, and then the press would begin. This was most often done by foot. Young men and women would roll up their clothes and tread the grapes, their bare feet and legs crushing the fruit to release its juice. The resulting liquid, the sweet, non-alcoholic must, would run out through a channel and be collected in large wooden barrels. These barrels were then sealed and moved to the cool, dark, and quiet of the castle cellars. Here, the final mysterious transformation would take place. The wild yeasts present on the skins of the grapes would begin to consume the sugars in the must, converting them into alcohol. The skill of the vintner lay in managing this process, in knowing when the fermentation was complete, and in carefully aging the wine until it was ready to be broached for a great feast. The orchard and the vineyard were more than just agricultural spaces. They were places of profound seasonal change. In the spring, the orchard would be a breathtaking cloud of pink and white blossoms, the air filled with a delicate perfume and the loud, industrious hum of countless bees, upon whose work the entire harvest depended. In the autumn, the branches of the trees would be bowed down, heavy with ripe, colorful fruit, the air sweet with the scent of apples and pears. The vineyard leaves would turn from green to brilliant shades of gold and crimson. These were landscapes of patient labor and, in a good year, abundant reward. They were the source of the cider that filled the simple wooden mugs in the great hall, and the wine that was carefully poured into the lord's silver goblet. They were the living, breathing, fruit-bearing legacy of the castle, a powerful symbol of the foresight and dominion of those who planted them. If this exploration of the fruitful labors of the past has brought you a sense of calm, consider subscribing to our channel to continue these nightly journeys. For now, let your mind rest in the peaceful, productive atmosphere of a medieval orchard, and allow yourself to drift into a deep and untroubled sleep. For a time, let us shift our focus. We have walked the ghostly paths of the castle's green spaces. We have examined the plants and understood their purpose. But a garden is not merely a collection of flora. It is a partnership between human effort and the natural world. Let us now turn our full attention to the human side of that partnership, to the people whose lives were as rooted in that soil as the plants they tended. We will speak of the unseen gardeners, the anonymous, calloused hands that coaxed life from the earth within the fortress walls. Their names are not carved on stone monuments. Their deeds are not sung in the epic poems of the age. They exist only in the quiet background of history. Yet their work was as fundamental to the survival and comfort of the castle's community as the stone walls themselves. From the lowest kitchen servant to the lord and his noble family, everyone depended on the skill and diligence of these quiet figures. In a large and wealthy household, the position of head gardener was one of considerable skill and quiet respect. This was not a role given to an unskilled laborer drafted from the fields. The head gardener, who was almost invariably a man, was a specialist, a craftsman whose medium was the living earth. He would have held responsibility for all the cultivated spaces within the castle's domain. He oversaw the vital productivity of the kitchen garden, consulted with the lady of the castle on the delicate needs of her physic and pleasure gardens, and managed the long-term health of the orchard and vineyard. He would have commanded a small team, perhaps 1 or 2 under-gardeners who were his apprentices, and a handful of general laborers, who could be called upon for the heaviest tasks of digging and hauling. The life of a gardener was governed by a different clock from the rest of the castle. While the guards might measure their day in the changing of the watch, and the cook by the timing of the meals, the gardener's life was measured by the sun, the moon, and the inexorable turning of the great wheel of the seasons. His day would begin before the first light of dawn had touched the top of the highest tower. He would rise in the quiet dimness and make his way out into the gardens, while the rest of the castle still slept. This was his time for quiet observation. He would walk the paths, his senses attuned to the subtle changes of his domain. He would read the signs in the morning sky to predict the day's weather. He would feel the leaves of the plants, checking for the dampness of dew or the first telltale signs of blight or mildew. He would look for the tracks of any nocturnal intruder, a rabbit that had found a way through the fence, or the silvery slime trail of a slug. His knowledge was not theoretical. It was profoundly intimate and practical. He would know the feel of the soil in his hands, able to tell by its texture and moisture content whether it needed water or was in danger of becoming waterlogged. He would recognize the first signs of disease on a leaf, the subtle yellowing or curling that signaled a problem. He could identify the pests that threatened his crops, not just by sight, but by the specific damage they left behind. He knew the difference between the neat holes left by a caterpillar and the ragged tearing of a snail. This was a deep, sensory knowledge, a form of literacy where the text was the living garden itself. This wisdom was almost never learned from books, in an age where literacy was the preserve of the clergy and the highest nobility. It is highly unlikely that a castle gardener could read or write. Even if he could, the beautifully illustrated herbals and agricultural treatises were fantastically expensive, hand-copied onto vellum, and were the treasured possessions of wealthy patrons or great monasteries. The gardener's knowledge was traditional and oral, passed down through the generations, from master to apprentice, from father to son. It was a wisdom accumulated over centuries of trial and error, a deep and localized understanding of the specific climate, the unique soil composition of the castle grounds, and the individual quirks and needs of each variety of plant he cultivated. He was a living library of horticultural knowledge. The gardener's tools were an extension of his own hands. They were simple, robust, and designed for a lifetime of hard use. His most important tool was the spade, used for the back-breaking work of turning over the heavy soil. The blade would have been made of iron, hammered into shape by the castle blacksmith, and fitted to a handle of strong, smooth ash wood. He would have a heavy long-tined fork for breaking up compacted clods of earth and for turning the compost heap. A broad-bladed hoe was his primary weapon in the endless war against weeds. A simple wooden rake was used for smoothing the soil of the seedbeds into a fine tilth. For more delicate work, he had a sharp knife, its blade kept keen on a whetstone, used for pruning, taking cuttings, and harvesting vegetables. Watering was a constant and laborious task. He might have watering cans made from fired clay or even from stitched leather, but for larger jobs, water had to be carried in 2 heavy wooden buckets, yoked across the gardener's shoulders, from the castle well. This was physically demanding work, made all the more stressful by the knowledge that the well was a finite resource, the castle's primary source of drinking water, which had to be used with great care. He would have understood the art of mulching, of covering the soil around his plants with a layer of straw or other organic matter to retain moisture and suppress weeds, a simple technique to make every precious bucket of water go further. The gardener's social position within the castle hierarchy was unique and somewhat ambiguous. He was a manual laborer, his hands permanently stained with soil, his clothes practical and rough. In this sense, he was on a similar level to the other craftsmen, the blacksmith, the carpenter, or the mason. However, his specialized and vital skills afforded him a degree of respect and autonomy that other laborers did not have. His work was essential to the health and well-being of the entire household. He had to work in close collaboration with the castle's cook, a powerful figure in the domestic hierarchy. They would have a daily conversation, the cook explaining what was needed for the day's meals, the gardener reporting on what was at its peak and ready for harvesting. He would also have direct, if formal, interactions with the lady of the castle. She was traditionally the keeper of the household's health, and so the physic garden was her domain. She would consult with the gardener on the cultivation of her medicinal herbs. She would also take a keen interest in her pleasure garden, and the gardener would be responsible for executing her vision, for ensuring that her private sanctuary was always a place of beauty and fragrance. This access to the highest levels of the castle's society, combined with the quiet authority that came from his deep knowledge, set the gardener apart. He was a man who walked between the worlds of the servants' hall and the lord's private chambers. Let us try to picture one such man, a composite of the thousands of anonymous gardeners of the age. Let us call him Thomas. Thomas is on his knees beside a bed of young leeks. He is not a young man. His face is a map of his life, deeply lined and tanned by a lifetime of working outdoors in all weathers. His hair is grey, his back is permanently stooped, and his knuckles are swollen from years of hard, physical work. His clothes are simple, a tunic and hose of rough, undyed wool, practical and durable, and stained with the memory of 1,000 days spent in the garden. He moves with a slow, deliberate economy of motion. There is no wasted energy. Every movement is efficient, the result of a lifetime of repeating the same tasks. He is carefully thinning the leeks, his thumb and forefinger moving with a surprising delicacy. He is selecting the weaker seedlings, pulling them gently from the soil to allow the stronger ones more space to grow. He is not just removing them, he is inspecting each one. He is in a state of deep concentration, a quiet conversation with his plants and the soil. He is not thinking about the great affairs of the kingdom or the latest rumors from the court. His world is this small, 3-foot by 10-foot rectangle of earth. His concerns are the threat of a late frost, the first signs of rust on the leaves, the need for rain. His work is a form of meditation, a deep and grounding connection to the fundamental cycles of life, death, and renewal. The lives of gardeners like Thomas were quiet, lived almost entirely in the background of the grand stage of history. They witnessed the comings and goings of lords and ladies, the births of heirs, the preparations for war, and the celebrations of victory. They were the silent, constant presence, the custodians of the green spaces that sustained the castle community. Their contribution, while rarely acknowledged, was immense. Without their patient, skillful, and relentless labor, the castle's diet would have been dangerously impoverished, its inhabitants more susceptible to the ravages of scurvy and other diseases of malnutrition. Without their work, the lady would have had no herbs for her remedies, no flowers for her private pleasance. The world within the castle walls would have been a harsher, bleaker, and less beautiful place. Their legacy is not written in stone or recorded in the chronicles of kings. Their legacy is in the soil itself. It is in the subtle but persistent changes they made to the landscape, the deep, dark, fertile soil they created in their raised beds. It is in the faint, ghostly outlines of the gardens they tended, outlines that can sometimes still be detected by the keen eye of an archaeologist. They are the true, unsung heroes of our story. They were the men and women whose entire lives were devoted to the quiet miracle of turning a seed into a harvest. As you continue to relax, as your breathing deepens and your body grows heavy, let your thoughts settle on these forgotten figures. Acknowledge their silent, essential contribution to the life of the past. Let the image of Thomas, kneeling in his garden, a figure of quiet dignity and profound skill, be a symbol of all the unseen work that sustains our world. Theirs was a life of purpose, rooted in the earth. Allow the sense of their patient, steady rhythm to guide you into your own state of deep and peaceful rest. If these quiet stories from the lives of ordinary people of the past bring you comfort, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you can join us for future journeys. For now, there is nothing more to do. Simply rest and let the quiet history of the garden be your guide to sleep. Let us now delve deeper than the rich, dark soil of the garden bed. Let us look beyond the practical uses of the plants, beyond their ability to feed the body and to mend its ailments. We are about to explore the very soul of the medieval garden, the rich and complex tapestry of meaning and symbolism that was woven into its every element, from the highest stone wall to the humblest flowering herb. To the medieval mind, the world was not a random collection of objects and phenomena. It was a book, a divine text, written by the hand of God. Every element of creation, from the vast and silent turning of the stars in the night sky to the intricate veins on a single leaf, was a word in that sacred text, holding a deeper spiritual meaning for those with the eyes to see and the heart to understand. And of all the pages in this book of nature, the garden was perhaps the most richly illuminated, a space freighted with layers of profound symbolism, a physical representation of the deepest ideas of faith, love, and the human condition. The most powerful, the most pervasive, and the most important symbol of all was that of the enclosed garden, the hortus conclusus. This image, drawn directly from the evocative and poetic lines of the Song of Solomon in the Bible, resonated with incredible power throughout the medieval period. A garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. These words were universally understood, not as a description of a literal garden, but as a potent and beautiful metaphor for the purity, the sanctity, and the untouched grace of the Virgin Mary. She was the garden, enclosed and protected from the sin of the world. Her virginity was the spring shut up, the fountain sealed. Her womb was the sacred ground in which the seed of God was planted. The pleasure garden of the castle, with its high, impenetrable walls, its single, often locked gate, and its pure, life-giving central fountain, was a living, breathing, three-dimensional embodiment of this profound theological idea. To create such a garden was an act of devotion. To walk within its walls was to enter a symbolic space of protected purity. It was to leave the noisy, profane, and chaotic world of the outer bailey and the lands beyond, and to step into a sanctuary. The garden wall was not just a physical barrier, it was a spiritual one. It was a clear and absolute demarcation line between the ordered, civilized, Christian world within, and the untamed, often frightening wilderness that lay just beyond the castle's reach. The great forests of the medieval world were seen not as places of recreation, but as places of danger, of wild beasts, of pagan spirits, and of demonic forces. The garden wall held all of that at bay. It created a space where the soul could feel as safe as the body. This idea was closely intertwined with another, equally powerful symbol: the garden as a recreation of the Garden of Eden. The book of Genesis tells the story of God's first creation, a perfect paradise of harmony and abundance, a place where humanity walked in peace with God and nature. The fall of man resulted in an expulsion from this paradise, a banishment into a world of toil, suffering, and mortality. The act of creating a garden was, in a very real sense, a human attempt to reclaim a small fragment of that lost perfection. It was an act of profound hope, an effort to imitate God's own creative power by bringing order, beauty, and harmony out of a small patch of raw earth. The gardener, in this context, was not just a laborer. He was a participant in a divine act, a mini-creator who was restoring a small piece of the world to its original, intended state of grace. This Edenic symbolism was often built directly into the garden's structure. The four rivers that the Bible describes as flowing out of Eden, the Pison, the Gihon, the Tigris, and the Euphrates, were represented in the common garden layout. The main paths, often intersecting at the central fountain, would divide the garden into four distinct quadrants. To walk these paths was to walk in a symbolic representation of the sacred geography of paradise. This four-part structure also resonated with other powerful medieval concepts: the four seasons of the year, the four classical elements of earth, air, fire, and water, and the four humors of the human body. The garden was a microcosm of the entire created order, a map of the universe in miniature, with God, represented by the life-giving water of the fountain, at its very center. Within this highly symbolic space, the individual plants themselves were not just botanical specimens. They were the letters and words of a complex floral language, a form of floriography where every bloom and every leaf carried a specific and widely understood meaning. This was a language of faith, virtue, and love. The undisputed queen of this language was the rose. No other flower held such a complex and layered set of meanings. The red rose, particularly the deep crimson Rosa gallica, was the symbol of earthly, passionate love. In the tradition of courtly love, to give a red rose was a declaration of devotion, but it was also a profound Christian symbol. Its rich red color represented the blood of Christ, shed on the cross for the salvation of mankind. It was therefore the flower of martyrdom, a symbol of the ultimate sacrifice made for faith. The thorns of the rose were a direct and unavoidable reminder of the crown of thorns, a symbol of suffering and the pain that is inseparable from both divine and mortal love. In contrast, the white rose, the pure and elegant Rosa alba, was the ultimate symbol of the Virgin Mary. Its pristine, unblemished white petals represented her purity, her innocence, and her freedom from original sin. To see a white rose in the garden was to be reminded of the Queen of Heaven. Alongside the rose, the lily held a place of supreme honor. The tall, stately Madonna lily, with its magnificent, trumpet-shaped white flowers, was another powerful Marian symbol. Its brilliant whiteness was a sign of her purity, while the golden stamens at its heart were seen as representing the divine light of the Holy Spirit that dwelt within her. Its tall, noble bearing represented her status as the regal Queen of Heaven. Often, in paintings of the Annunciation, the Archangel Gabriel is depicted offering a lily to Mary, a symbolic representation of the pure and divine nature of the message he brings. Even the humblest of flowers held deep meaning. The violet, with its sweet, unassuming perfume and its habit of growing low to the ground, often hidden beneath larger leaves, was the symbol of humility. It was a floral reminder of the virtue of modesty, and a representation of Christ's own humility in choosing to be born in a lowly stable. The columbine, or aquilegia, was another flower rich in symbolism. Its name was derived from the Latin word for dove, columba, because the shape of its spurred petals was thought to resemble a circle of doves gathering together. As the dove was the physical manifestation of the Holy Spirit, the columbine became a symbol of the Spirit's presence. The iris, with its magnificent and complex flower, was also a symbol of Mary. Its tall, sharp, sword-shaped leaves were seen as a representation of the 7 sorrows that the prophet Simeon predicted would one day pierce her heart. Its use in the royal emblem of France, the fleur-de-lis, also gave it an association with royalty and power, befitting the Queen of Heaven. Even a plant as seemingly simple as the wild strawberry was laden with meaning. It was seen as a symbol of perfect righteousness and spiritual merit. This was because the strawberry plant is unique in that it often produces flowers and fruits at the same time, a sign of its goodness. Its 3-part leaf was a clear and obvious symbol of the Holy Trinity, and because it grew low to the ground, it was also another symbol of humility. This symbolic language extended even to the herbs. Rosemary, with its enduring fragrance, was the herb of remembrance and fidelity, a promise not to forget. Sage, its very name derived from the Latin salvare, meaning to save or to heal, was a symbol of wisdom and was thought to promote long life. Hyssop, a humble, shrubby herb mentioned frequently in the Old Testament for use in purification rituals, was a symbol of cleansing and penitence. The choice and placement of every single plant in the garden could therefore be read like a sacred text, a silent sermon on the virtues of the Christian faith, the nature of love, and the path to salvation. This symbolic understanding of the garden was not an obscure knowledge limited to theologians and scholars. These meanings were part of the very fabric of medieval culture. An illiterate peasant girl, looking at a stained glass window in her local church, would see a depiction of the Virgin Mary holding a white lily, and would understand its meaning instantly. A knight would see the image of a strawberry carved into the woodwork of a chapel, and would recognize it as a symbol of the Trinity. These symbols were reinforced in sermons, in religious plays, in paintings, and in popular stories. They were the common visual and intellectual vocabulary of the age. Therefore, when people entered the castle garden, they were not just seeing a collection of pretty flowers. They were entering a space that was alive with meaning, a space that was designed to elevate the mind and spirit, to instruct, and to inspire contemplation. The garden was, therefore, much more than a place for growing food or enjoying a moment of leisure. It was a space for spiritual reflection, a kind of outdoor chapel. It was a place where the physical and the metaphysical worlds met, where the tangible beauty of a flower could lead the mind to contemplate the intangible beauty of a divine mystery. The very act of gardening, of tending this symbolic space, could be seen as a form of prayer, a way of participating in the divine act of creation and of maintaining a small piece of sacred order in a fallen world. Let your mind absorb this deeper layer of meaning. See the garden now not just as a collection of plants in beds, but as a sacred text written on the earth. See the rose not just as a beautiful and fragrant flower, but as a complex symbol of love, sacrifice, and suffering. See the enclosing wall not as a mere boundary of stone, but as the protective embrace of faith. creating a small sanctuary of peace, purity, and profound order. The lost gardens of the medieval castle were not just buried under centuries of soil and stone. They were also buried under layers of forgotten symbolism, a rich, beautiful, and deeply intelligent language that is waiting for us to quietly rediscover it. If this deep and quiet exploration of the past has brought you a sense of peace and tranquility, consider subscribing to our channel. There are many more forgotten worlds and silent histories for us to journey through together. For now, there is nothing more to understand, nothing more to do. Simply allow the profound peace of this sacred, symbolic space to settle over you, and let it guide you into a deep and truly restful sleep. Let us now embark on a different and more delicate kind of excavation. We are not setting out with trowels and brushes to dig in the damp earth of a castle ruin. Our excavation is one of the mind, a journey into the quiet archives and the patient, living laboratories of botanical history. Our quest is to find the ghosts of the medieval garden, the forgotten flora. We are searching for the plants that were once the commonplace and essential inhabitants of the kitchen garden, the physic garden, and even the pleasure garden, but which have since vanished from our modern world. Some have disappeared from our gardens, some from our kitchens, and some have vanished from the wild altogether. This is a story of meticulous botanical detective work, of piecing together the faintest of clues from ancient, handwritten manuscripts, from the microscopic evidence found in archaeological digs, and from the complex language of modern genetic analysis, all in an effort to understand, and sometimes even to revive, the lost plants of the Middle Ages. The plant world, like the human world, is not static. It is in a constant state of flux. Over the centuries, plants are discovered, cultivated, celebrated, and then, sometimes, abandoned. The vegetables, fruits, and flowers that filled the medieval garden were often profoundly different from their modern descendants. We live in an age of agricultural uniformity. The carrots in a supermarket in one country look and taste almost identical to those in another. They are prized for their consistent size, their bright, unblemished color, their sweetness, and their ability to withstand long-distance transportation. The medieval world, by contrast, was a world of immense biodiversity. Every region, every valley, sometimes even every individual manor or monastery, would have cultivated its own unique local varieties, or landraces of common plants. These had been selected over generations for their ability to thrive in the local soil and climate, for their resistance to local pests and diseases, and for the specific flavors and qualities that the local people prized. The vegetables of the medieval garden were generally smaller, more varied in shape and color, and often possessed stronger, more earthy or bitter flavors than we are accustomed to today. The relentless drive for commercial efficiency and a standardized global market in modern agriculture has led to a catastrophic loss of this genetic diversity. Thousands of these old heirloom varieties, once the staples that sustained entire communities, have simply disappeared, their unique genetic codes erased from the world. Our quest is to rediscover the memory of this lost world of flavor and form. Our first and most important source of clues comes from the written record. We must turn to the patient and meticulous work of the past. We can look at the surprisingly detailed household accounts of great castles and noble families, which sometimes list the seeds and plants that were purchased for the garden. We can study the inventories of monastic estates, which often included a careful accounting of the produce from their gardens. These documents provide us with lists of names, a ghostly vocabulary of forgotten plants. They speak of pottage herbs and salad greens, of roots and fruits that have long since fallen out of common use. The most beautiful and informative of these written sources are the great herbals of the period. These were magnificent books, painstakingly hand-copied onto expensive vellum by skilled scribes, often in the scriptoriums of monasteries. They were the encyclopedias of the botanical world, a compilation of the knowledge inherited from classical Greek and Roman writers, combined with the practical observations of medieval gardeners and healers. The finest of these herbals were beautifully illustrated, with detailed hand-painted images of each plant. These illustrations, while sometimes stylized, are often accurate enough to give us a clear idea of what these lost plants looked like. They allow us to see the pale, branching roots of the medieval carrot, the small, intensely colored flowers of an old variety of rose, or the specific leaf shape of a now obscure medicinal herb. It is in these texts that we encounter a host of plants with evocative and mysterious names. We read of costmary, a perennial herb with long, tongue-shaped leaves and a fresh, minty balsamic scent. It was also known as alecost, as it was a primary ingredient used to flavor and preserve ale before the widespread adoption of hops. Its other common name was Bible leaf, because its long, flat, fragrant leaves were often used by people as bookmarks in their Bibles and prayer books, releasing a pleasant scent as they turned the pages during a long sermon. Today, it is a plant rarely seen outside of specialist historical gardens. We find references to tansy, a hardy, fern-like herb with clusters of small, bright yellow, button-like flowers. Its flavor is intensely bitter and pungent, and in small quantities, it was used to flavor puddings, cakes, and omelettes, particularly around Easter. It was also a powerful insect repellent. Bunches of tansy would be hung indoors to ward off flies, and it was used as a strewing herb on floors. Its potent nature also made it a key ingredient in folk medicine, though it was known to be toxic in large doses. The herbals speak of lovage, a tall, stately plant with glossy leaves that look and tastes very much like a powerful, intensified version of celery. Every part of the lovage plant was used. The leaves were added to soups and stotages. The stems could be candied like angelica, and the seeds were used as a spice, similar to fennel or caraway. It was a hugely popular and versatile plant, yet today it is almost completely unknown in modern kitchens. One of the most intriguing lost vegetables we encounter is spirit. This was a root vegetable, a member of the same family as carrots and parsnips. It produces a cluster of long, thin, white roots, which were said to have a delicious sweetness, somewhere between a parsnip and a sweet potato. Skirret was a staple in the medieval and Tudor kitchen garden, boiled, roasted, or fried in fritters. But it was a fiddly vegetable to prepare, with a tough, woody core that had to be removed, and as sweeter and more easily cultivated varieties of parsnip and potato became available, the humble skirret simply fell out of favor and faded into almost complete obscurity. Another forgotten root was the rampion, a plant known to us now mostly through the fairy tale of Rapunzel, whose mother had an overwhelming craving for the rampions growing in the witch's garden. The plant has leaves that could be eaten in salads, but it was the small, white, turnip-like root, eaten raw, that was most prized for its nutty flavor. The search for these forgotten plants is not confined to the dusty pages of old books. Our second, and perhaps most exciting, set of clues comes directly from the earth itself. The science of archaeobotany allows us to find the physical, microscopic evidence of the plants that grew in a specific place hundreds of years ago. When archaeologists excavate the site of a medieval castle, they are not just looking for pottery and metalwork. They are also looking for the ghostly imprint of the garden. They take carefully documented soil samples from areas that have been identified as former garden beds, rubbish pits, or latrines. Back in the laboratory, these soil samples are subjected to a battery of highly specialized tests. A process called flotation is used, where the soil is gently washed with water. Lighter organic materials, such as tiny seeds and fragments of charcoal, float to the surface, where they can be skimmed off and collected with a fine mesh sieve. Under a powerful microscope, these tiny remnants can be identified by a specialist. A single, carbonized seed, preserved by being accidentally burned in a kitchen fire and then thrown away, can be enough to prove that a certain plant was being grown or consumed at that site. The discovery of preserved pips can tell us about the fruits they were eating. Even more resilient than seeds are pollen grains. Every flowering plant produces pollen, and each species has a unique shape and size that can be identified by a trained palynologist. Pollen can be preserved for thousands of years in the right conditions, particularly in waterlogged environments like the bottom of a castle moat or a disused well. By analyzing the pollen record from different layers of sediment, scientists can reconstruct a detailed history of the local vegetation and can identify the specific, non-native plants that were being deliberately cultivated within the castle walls. A third type of microscopic clue is the phytolith. This is a tiny, rigid structure made of silica, the same material as sand, which forms in the cells of many plants. As the plant decays, these microscopic silica skeletons are left behind in the soil. Like pollen, different types of plants produce differently shaped phytoliths. They are incredibly durable and can survive in the soil for millennia, providing yet another way to identify the ghost of a plant long after it has vanished. Finding the evidence for these lost plants is one part of the challenge. The next, and perhaps more romantic part of the quest is to find them alive. This is a hunt for living history, a botanical treasure hunt that often leads researchers and dedicated enthusiasts to the most remote and forgotten corners of the world. The search might lead to an old, overgrown cottage garden in a secluded valley where a family has been saving the seeds of a strange, bitter-tasting bean for generations, simply because their grandmother always grew it. It might lead to an isolated monastic community high in the mountains, where the monks have continued to cultivate the same medicinal herbs in their cloister garden for 800 years, completely untouched by the trends and developments of the outside world. These small, isolated pockets are the living gene banks of our agricultural past. The people who tend them are the quiet, unassuming custodians of a priceless genetic inheritance. For a botanist, finding a thriving patch of a vegetable variety that was thought to be extinct is as thrilling as an archaeologist discovering a pharaoh's tomb. Once a lost variety has been rediscovered, the work of reviving it begins. This is the task of the seed savers and the heritage plant nurseries. They take the precious few seeds or cuttings and begin the slow, patient process of growing them, multiplying them, and reintroducing them to the world. It is a work of great dedication. They must relearn the specific needs and habits of each plant, how to germinate its seeds, how to protect it from modern pests, and how to harvest it for the best flavor. They create detailed records, document its history, and make the seeds available to other gardeners, ensuring that the plant will not be lost again. Sometimes, however, the original plant is truly extinct. Its unique genetic code is gone forever. In these cases, a new and exciting field of science can sometimes offer a glimmer of hope. By studying the descriptions and illustrations in old herbals, and by analyzing the genetic makeup of the plant's closest living relatives, botanists can sometimes attempt to recreate the lost ancestor through a long and painstaking process of backbreeding. They might take a wild carrot, for example, which is naturally pale and fibrous, and selectively breed it over many generations with other heirloom varieties that retain some of its ancient characteristics, in an attempt to produce a plant that looks and tastes like the medieval carrot. This work is at the very frontier of historical and botanical science, a slow and patient attempt to rewind the clock of agricultural development. The revival of these forgotten plants is so much more than a simple academic exercise or a nostalgic hobby. It is a profoundly important act. On a practical level, it is a way of preserving genetic diversity. The small number of standardized crops that the modern world relies on are incredibly vulnerable. A single new disease or a sudden change in climate could wipe out a huge portion of our food supply. The old heirloom varieties, with their diverse genetic makeup, hold a treasure trove of traits for resilience, disease resistance, and adaptability. They are a vital resource for the future of agriculture. But beyond the practical, the revival of these plants is a way of reconnecting with our own past on a deep, sensory level. History can sometimes feel abstract and distant, a collection of names and dates, but to grow a skirret root in your own garden, to harvest it, cook it, and then to taste its unique sweetness, a flavor that has not been widely experienced for 500 years, is a form of time travel. It is a direct and tangible connection to the people who once relied on that very plant for their survival. It allows us to experience the lost flavors of the medieval world, to understand the bitter, pungent, and earthy tastes that once flavored their pottages, their ales, and their medicines. It enriches our understanding of their world by allowing us to share one of their most fundamental sensory experiences. As you drift and dream, as your mind floats in the quiet space between wakefulness and sleep, think of this quiet, ongoing work of revival. Picture the historian, her eyes straining in the dim light of a library, deciphering the spidery script of a medieval herbal. Picture the archaeologist, carefully brushing the soil from a single, tiny, carbonized seed. And picture the dedicated gardener, standing in a remote field, carefully tending a row of strange-looking plants, the living ghosts of a forgotten time. They are the new gardeners, tending not just to a plot of land, but to the very memory of the plants themselves. They are the guardians of a fragile and precious legacy, working to ensure that the forgotten flora of the lost gardens will not be lost to us forever. If this quiet story of discovery and revival has brought you a sense of peace, consider subscribing to our channel. There are many more forgotten histories waiting to be unearthed. For now, simply let your mind be still. Allow the gentle process of rediscovery to be a metaphor for your own journey into rest, and drift into a deep and peaceful sleep. Let us return now, in our minds, to the castle grounds. We are not here to plant seeds or to harvest flowers. We are here for a different, more profound purpose. We are here to listen. We are joining a team of archaeologists as they begin the slow, deliberate, and incredibly delicate process of peeling back the layers of time. Their goal is to reveal the secrets of a garden that has been buried and forgotten for centuries. This is an endeavor that requires extreme patience, meticulous observation, and a unique form of imagination, for a garden is one of the most ephemeral and challenging things for an archaeologist to excavate. Unlike a stone wall, which remains standing, or a pottery shard, which endures in the earth, a garden is a living, breathing, constantly changing entity. When it is abandoned, it does not crumble, it simply decays. The flowers wilt, the wooden trellises rot, the carefully tended beds are overrun by weeds, and eventually the entire space reverts to nature, leaving behind only the faintest of traces, a ghost in the earth. The task of the archaeologist is to learn how to read that ghost. The first step in finding a lost garden is not to dig, but to look. The search often begins with a careful study of the landscape itself, the topography of the land within and around the castle walls. An experienced landscape archaeologist can read the subtle language of the ground. They might walk the site in the very low, raking light of dawn or dusk, when the long shadows can reveal subtle changes in the elevation of the ground that are invisible in the harsh light of midday. A faint, almost imperceptible rectangular depression might be the only remaining sign of a series of sunken beds. A slight, linear ridge, barely a few inches high, could be the last remnant of a raised path or the footings of a collapsed garden wall. Differences in the vegetation can also be a clue. An area where the grass is lusher and greener might indicate the presence of deeper, richer, more organic soil beneath, the kind of soil that would have been created by generations of diligent gardeners. The archaeologists will also immerse themselves in historical research. They will spend long hours in the quiet of local and national archives, searching for any document that might mention the castle's gardens. Old maps, though rare for the earliest periods, can be invaluable. Estate plans from later centuries might preserve the layout of earlier features. Written descriptions of the castle, perhaps in a traveler's account, a poem, or a legal document describing the property, might contain a passing reference to a fair harbour or a well-stocked orchard. The household accounts of the castle, if they have survived, can be a treasure trove, recording payments to gardeners, the purchase of seeds, or the cost of building a new wall or fountain. Each of these fragments is a piece of the puzzle, helping the team to build a picture of where the gardens might have been and what they might have looked like. Once a potential site has been identified, the modern non-invasive tools of archaeology come into play. Before a single spadeful of earth is disturbed, the team will conduct a geophysical survey. This is a way of X-raying the ground to create a map of what lies beneath. A technique called magnetometry is often used. The survey involves walking back and forth across the site in a systematic grid pattern, carrying an instrument that measures tiny variations in the Earth's magnetic field. Buried features like filled-in ditches, pits, or the fired clay of a hearth or kiln all have a slightly different magnetic signature from the surrounding soil. The data is downloaded into a computer, which produces a ghostly, black and white image of the buried landscape. A series of dark rectangular shapes might show the outlines of planting beds. A thin, straight line could be a path or a drainage channel. Another common technique is ground-penetrating radar, or GPR. This works by sending tiny pulses of radio energy into the ground from a transmitter. When these pulses hit a buried object or a change in the soil layers, they bounce back to a receiver. The machine measures the time it takes for the pulses to return, which can be used to calculate the depth of the feature. GPR is particularly good at finding solid objects like the buried foundations of a wall, a stone-lined well, or the remnants of a fountain. These non-invasive methods are a revolution in archaeology. They allow the team to see the garden's hidden skeleton, to understand its basic layout, before they ever make the decision to begin the slow, expensive, and irreversible process of excavation. When the excavation finally begins, it is an exercise in surgical precision. The top layer of turf and topsoil, known as the plough soil, is carefully removed. This layer is often disturbed by centuries of later activity, and while it is checked for artifacts, The real story lies beneath. Once this layer is gone, the archaeologists begin the process of cleaning the exposed surface with trowels and brushes. They are not looking for objects so much as for changes in the color and texture of the soil. This is the key to reading the ghost of the garden. The dark, black, organic-rich soil of a former planting bed, enriched by years of compost and manure, will look dramatically different from the pale, compacted, gritty soil of a gravel path that ran alongside it. The place where a wooden fence post once stood will have rotted away, leaving behind a dark, circular stain, a post hole, which is a clear indicator of a former boundary. The process is incredibly slow and methodical. The archaeologists work on their hands and knees, gently scraping and brushing away the soil, millimeter by millimeter. As they work, the layout of the garden begins to reappear, not as a vibrant living space, but as a subtle pattern of stains in the earth. It is like a faint, photographic negative of the garden, revealed for the first time in centuries. They might uncover a long, linear feature filled with dark soil, the ghost of a trench that was dug and filled with fertile compost to create a planting bed, a technique known as a trench bed. They might find a perfect rectangle of dark soil, the last trace of a raised bed whose wooden or stone frame has long since vanished. The archaeologists are like detectives at the scene of a crime, looking for any clue, no matter how small, that can help them to reconstruct the events of the past. They might find a scatter of broken roofing tiles in one area, suggesting that a small wooden shed or a covered walkway once stood there. A concentration of oyster shells, a common source of lime for improving the soil, can point to a place where soil amendments were prepared. They might find the faint, ghostly outline of a turf bench, a band of darker, richer soil where the turf structure once stood against a wall. Each new discovery, each subtle change in the soil, is another word, another sentence in the garden's lost story. Every feature is meticulously recorded. It is measured, drawn to scale on a plan, and photographed from every angle. The precise location of every discovery is logged using a device called a total station, which uses a laser to measure distances and elevations with pinpoint accuracy, creating a detailed three-dimensional map of the entire site. The soil itself is the single most important artifact on a garden excavation. It is the archive, the library that holds the detailed story of what happened there. Soil samples, known as environmental samples, are taken from every feature and at every level of the excavation. These samples are carefully bagged and labeled with their exact location. Back in the laboratory, these bags of earth are treated with the reverence of a precious manuscript. They are the key to unlocking the garden's deepest secrets. The primary technique for analyzing these samples is flotation. A bucketful of the excavated soil is poured into a large tank of water, which is gently agitated with jets of air or water. The heavier components of the soil, the gravel and sand, sink to the bottom. The lighter organic materials, such as seeds, charcoal, and small bones, float to the top. This floating material, known as the flot, is carefully skimmed off the surface of the water with a very fine mesh sieve, which can be as fine as 250 microns, or 1/4 of a millimeter, to catch even the tiniest of seeds. The flot is then allowed to dry slowly. Once dry, the real work begins. The archaeobotanist sits at a microscope, with a bright light and a pair of fine tweezers, and begins the painstaking process of sorting through this dried matrix of tiny fragments. It is a work of immense concentration and requires an encyclopedic knowledge of botanical forms. They are looking for seeds and fruits, which are often preserved by being carbonized or burned. A seed that fell into a kitchen fire and was then thrown out with the ash onto a rubbish heap or a compost pile can be perfectly preserved for centuries. By identifying these seeds, the archaeobotanist can build up a definitive list of the plants that were being grown and consumed in the castle. Finding a concentration of the seeds of leeks, cabbage, and beans in the soil from a particular bed is strong evidence that it was part of the kitchen garden. The discovery of the pollen from roses and lilies, or the seeds of fragrant herbs like lavender, would point to a pleasure garden. The seeds of medicinal plants, like henbane or comfrey, would be the signature of a physic garden. The analysis of insect remains, a field called archaeoentomology, can also provide a wealth of information. The hard, chitinous exoskeletons of beetles and other insects can be preserved in the soil, particularly in waterlogged conditions. The presence of certain types of dung beetles might indicate that a compost heap, rich in animal manure, was located nearby. The presence of specific beetles that feed only on certain plants can be another way of identifying what was being grown. The tiny, delicate bones of small animals, such as mice, voles, and small birds, can speak to the wider ecosystem that the garden supported. The presence of frog bones might suggest that a pond or a fountain was a feature of the garden. Fish bones found in the soil of a garden bed could indicate that waste from the kitchen, including the remains of fish, was being used as a fertilizer. It is a slow, methodical, and incredibly detailed process. It is a universe away from the popular image of archaeology as a hunt for golden treasures and royal tombs. The treasures here are microscopic: a single, perfectly preserved raspberry seed, a single grain of wheat pollen, a single iridescent wing case from a beetle, or, back in the trench, a faint, almost invisible discoloration in the soil that marks the forgotten edge of a flower bed. But when all of these tiny, disparate clues are brought together, they allow the archaeologists to reconstruct the lost garden with a remarkable, and often surprising, degree of accuracy. They can map its paths and its enclosures. They can identify the function of its different beds. They can create a detailed list of the very plants that once grew there. They can even begin to understand the seasonal rhythms of the garden, the cycle of planting, harvesting, and composting that took place on that very spot hundreds of years ago. Let your mind be calm and focused, like the mind of the archaeologist kneeling in the bottom of a trench. Imagine the quiet, rhythmic, scraping sound of a trowel against the earth. Imagine the gentle whisking of a soft brush as it carefully clears the soil away to reveal a fragment of the past. This is a form of communion with time itself. It is the process of giving a voice to the silent, patient earth. It is a way of persuading the ghost of the garden to tell its story one last time before its faint traces are recorded, and then, by the very act of excavation, removed forever. It is a profound and moving reminder that even when something is gone, completely vanished from the surface of the world, its echo, its memory, can remain, waiting patiently in the quiet darkness for those with the skill, the dedication, and the patience to find it and to read its story. If this slow and patient journey of discovery has brought you a sense of calm and quiet focus, I invite you to subscribe and join us for more stories from the deep past. For now, there is nothing more to be done. Simply allow the quiet, methodical process of excavation to be a model for your own journey into rest. Let the layers of your day be gently brushed away until you reach a place of profound peace and stillness. Our long night's journey is now drawing to its close. For the next hour, we have walked together through the quiet, forgotten landscapes of the past, our minds tracing the faint outlines of the lost gardens buried beneath medieval castles. We began with the very first seeds of the idea, the humble, desperate plots of the earliest fortresses, gardens born not of a desire for beauty, but from the raw and urgent necessity of survival. We saw how these simple patches of earth were a bastion against siege and starvation, a living guarantee of sustenance when the world outside the walls had become a threat. We felt the profound importance of a handful of beans, a cluster of tough-skinned root vegetables, a small harvest that meant the difference between endurance and surrender. From there, our journey took us into the heart of the castle's daily life, into the orderly and productive world of the kitchen garden, the potager. We walked its narrow, practical paths, laid between the meticulously tended raised beds. We let our minds imagine the rich, dark, fertile soil, built up over years with compost and care. We considered the array of vegetables and herbs that formed the very foundation of the medieval palate, the pungent alliums, the hardy brassicas, the earthy roots, and the fragrant herbs that transformed simple subsistence into something that could be called cuisine. We acknowledged the direct, unbroken line that ran from that patch of soil to the great cooking pots in the castle kitchen, a model of seasonal and local eating that was not a lifestyle choice, but the simple, unvarnished reality of life. We then stepped through a quieter gate into the more mysterious and sacred space of the physic garden, nature's own apothecary. We explored a world where medicine was not manufactured, but cultivated. We learned of the philosophies that guided the healer's hand, the doctrine of the four humours, which sought to bring the body into balance, and the doctrine of signatures, which saw in every leaf and flower a divine clue to its purpose. We reacquainted ourselves with the forgotten virtues of comfrey and yarrow, of St. John's wort and valerian. We considered the profound and intimate knowledge the healer possessed, a knowledge of harvesting times, of preparations, of dosages, and of the fine, dangerous line that separated a remedy from a poison. We stood in a place where science, folklore, and faith were all part of the same healing art. Our path then led us into the most exclusive and beautiful of the castle's spaces, the private sanctuary of the pleasure garden. Within the safety of the hortus conclusus, the enclosed garden, we found a world designed not to feed the body, but to soothe the soul. We sat for a moment on its imagined turf benches, releasing the scent of chamomile into the air. We listened to the gentle, hypnotic sound of a central fountain, a sound that masked the noise of the world outside and symbolized the life-giving waters of paradise. We considered the rich tapestry of flowers chosen for their beauty and, above all, for their intoxicating fragrance. We breathed in the scent of the medieval rose and the Madonna lily, and understood that this space was a living work of art, a stage for courtly life, and a profound symbol of purity and peace in a harsh and unforgiving age. We broadened our view to take in the larger landscapes of production, the orchard and the vineyard. We recognized the patience and foresight required to plant an apple tree, an act of faith in the future that would benefit not the planter, but his children and grandchildren. We considered the immense diversity of the fruits they cultivated, the hundreds of forgotten apple varieties destined for the cider press, the drink of the common man, and the precious grapes destined for the wine barrel, the drink of the nobility and the church. We acknowledged the immense, year-long labor required to maintain these spaces, the skilled arts of grafting and pruning, and the communal effort of the harvest, all part of a slow, patient collaboration with the land. We then turned our gaze away from the plants and focused on the people, on the unseen gardeners whose names are lost to history. We spent time with these quiet figures, whose lives were governed by the sun and the seasons, not by the castle bell. We acknowledged their deep, practical, and intuitive knowledge, a wisdom passed down not through books, but through generations of hands in the soil. We saw the simplicity and robustness of their tools and understood the sheer physical effort of their daily work. We recognized their unique position in the castle's hierarchy, a humble laborer whose specialized skills made him indispensable to the cook, the lady, and the lord. We honored their silent, essential contribution, recognizing that without them, the entire ecosystem of the castle would have collapsed. We delved deeper, beneath the soil, into the very soul of these gardens, exploring the rich and complex world of their symbolism. We saw how the garden was a mirror of the medieval mind, a physical manifestation of its most profound beliefs. We understood the hortus conclusus as a symbol of the Virgin Mary, and the entire garden as an attempt to recreate a fragment of the lost Garden of Eden. We learned to read the floral language of the time, to see in the rose a symbol of both earthly love and divine sacrifice, to see in the lily a sign of purity, and to find in the humble violet a lesson in humility. The garden, we discovered, was not just a place, but a text, a silent sermon in leaves and petals, a space designed for spiritual contemplation. We became botanical detectives, searching for the forgotten flora, the lost plants of the Middle Ages. We saw how the combined evidence of ancient manuscripts, with their beautiful illustrations and evocative names, and the modern science of archaeobotany, with its analysis of microscopic pollen grains and carbonized seeds, could bring the ghosts of these plants back to life. We learned of skirit and costmary, of tansy and lovage, and understood that the flavor palette of the past was vastly different, and in many ways, far richer and more diverse than our own. We celebrated the patient work of the seed savers and the heritage gardeners who were working to revive this lost botanical inheritance. And finally, we joined the archaeologists in the field. We watched as they read the subtle language of the landscape, and as they used the tools of modern science to see beneath the surface of the ground. We knelt with them in the trench and witnessed the slow, painstaking process of revealing the garden's ghost. We saw how the story of a garden could be read in the subtle changes in the color and texture of the soil, in the dark stain of a post hole, in the rich, organic matter of a former planting bed. We understood that the soil itself is an archive, and that through the meticulous analysis of its contents, the entire life of the garden could be reconstructed, its plants identified, its purpose understood. And so now, our long journey through the past is complete. We stand at the end of our exploration, and we ask a final, simple question. What remains of these lost gardens? Are they truly lost? A forgotten chapter of history? of interest only to scholars and archaeologists? Or do they, in fact, live on? The answer, of course, is that they are not lost at all. Their echoes are all around us, in the earth beneath our feet, in the food we eat, in the medicines we take, and in the very way we think about the world. The legacy of the medieval castle garden is a deep, powerful, and persistent current that flows quietly beneath the surface of our modern lives. In this final hour, let us trace the course of that current. Let us explore the enduring echoes of these ancient spaces. The most direct and tangible legacy is, of course, the legacy of sustenance. The medieval kitchen garden was a direct and powerful response to a fundamental human need, the need for a reliable and accessible source of food. That need has not changed. The modern allotment garden, that uniquely British institution of small, rented plots of land, is a direct and unbroken descendant of the castle's potager. Allotments are spaces of intense, practical cultivation, laid out in neat, orderly rows, their purpose to produce the maximum amount of food for a family's table. They are a living link to the idea of self-sufficiency, a small but significant rebellion against the complete reliance on a distant, industrial food system. This same echo can be seen in the Victory Gardens of the Second World War, in a time of national crisis. When supply lines were threatened and food was strictly rationed, governments on both sides of the Atlantic called upon their citizens to turn their backyards, their parks, and any available patch of spare land into vegetable gardens. "Dig for victory" was the slogan. This was a direct return to the mindset of the medieval castle under siege. The nation was the fortress, and every citizen became a gardener, cultivating their own small plot to contribute to the collective survival. It was a powerful reminder that in times of crisis, the ancient skill of growing one's own food is not a hobby, but a vital act of resilience. Today, this legacy continues in the vibrant and growing movements for organic gardening, for local food, and for urban agriculture. The person who chooses to cultivate a small vegetable patch on their balcony or in their backyard is participating in this ancient tradition. They are driven by a desire for fresher, healthier food, a desire to know where their food comes from, and a desire to reduce their dependence on a complex and often fragile global supply chain. The explosion of farmers' markets and community-supported agriculture schemes is a modern expression of the medieval castle's internal economy, a system where the connection between the producer and the consumer is direct, personal, and rooted in a shared local landscape. The community garden, a shared space where city dwellers can come together to cultivate plots of land, is perhaps the most perfect modern incarnation of the castle garden's spirit. It is an enclosed, protected green space in the midst of a dense, urban environment. It is a place of communal labor, where knowledge is shared and the harvest is celebrated. It fosters a sense of community and provides a source of fresh, healthy food in areas that are often food deserts. It is a living testament to the enduring power of a small piece of cultivated land to nourish a community, both literally and socially. The medieval kitchen garden is not dead. It has simply changed its form and continues to answer the same fundamental human needs it did 1,000 years ago. The legacy of the physic garden is just as profound, though its path to the present day is perhaps more complex. The tradition of the healer's garden, with its carefully cultivated medicinal herbs, was never truly lost. It was kept alive for centuries, not in the castles of the great, but in the small cottage gardens of ordinary people. The knowledge of the wise woman, the village herbalist, was passed down from mother to daughter, a quiet oral tradition of folk medicine that ran parallel to the development of formal, academic medicine. The remedies for common ailments, a chamomile tea to soothe the stomach, a lavender poultice to calm a headache, a comfrey salve for sprains and bruises. These practices continued, a persistent echo of the medieval apothecary. In the modern world, we are witnessing a powerful resurgence of interest in this ancient knowledge. The growing fields of herbalism, aromatherapy, and naturopathic medicine are all rooted in the same philosophy that governed the medieval physic garden, the belief that the natural world contains the means for our own healing. People are once again seeking out the gentle, holistic remedies of the plant world, not necessarily as a replacement for modern medicine, but as a complement to it, a way to support the body's own natural healing processes. The health food store, with its aisles of herbal teas, tinctures, and essential oils, is a modern, commercialized version of the healer's stillroom. Even the world of mainstream pharmaceutical medicine is deeply indebted to the physic garden. Many of our most powerful modern drugs have their origins in the plant world. Aspirin, one of the most widely used drugs in the world, is a synthetic version of salicin, a compound found in the bark of the willow tree, a plant whose pain-relieving properties were well known to medieval healers. The life-saving heart medication, digitalis, is derived from the foxglove, the very same beautiful but poisonous plant that was cultivated with such care in the physic garden. Quinine, the first effective treatment for malaria, comes from the bark of the cinchona tree. The list is long and continues to grow as scientists screen thousands of plant species for new and potentially life-saving compounds. In a very real sense, the modern pharmacologist is continuing the work of the medieval healer, searching for the hidden virtues of the plant world, albeit with the tools of chemistry and genetics, rather than the doctrine of signatures. The quiet whispers of the physic garden can still be heard in the most advanced laboratories of the 21st century. The legacy of the pleasure garden, the beautiful, enclosed sanctuary of the nobility, is perhaps the most visible of all. Its DNA can be traced through the entire history of Western garden design. The idea of the garden as an enclosed, protected space, a hortus conclusus, became the foundational principle of the great gardens of the Renaissance. The intricate, geometric knot gardens of the Tudor period, the magnificent parterres of Versailles. All of these are grander, more elaborate expressions of the same desire for order, beauty, and control over nature that first found expression in the small medieval pleasance. Even the great English landscape movement of the 18th century, which seemed to reject the formality of the enclosed garden in favor of vast, naturalistic parklands, was in its own way a response to the medieval model. It was an attempt to break down the walls, to blend the garden with the wider landscape. But the core idea of the garden as an idealized, perfected version of nature remained. In more recent times, we have seen a return to the principles of the medieval pleasure garden. The arts and crafts movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, with its emphasis on craftsmanship and natural materials, championed the idea of the garden as a series of outdoor rooms. Great garden designers like Gertrude Jekyll and Vita Sackville-West created gardens that were a sequence of enclosed, intimate spaces, each with its own character and planting scheme, a direct echo of the medieval desire for seclusion and intimacy. Today, this legacy is all around us. The public park, a green oasis in the heart of a bustling city, is the democratic descendant of the aristocratic pleasure garden. It is a shared sanctuary, a place where people can escape the noise and the concrete of the urban environment and find a moment of peace and connection with nature. The small, private courtyard garden of a city apartment, the carefully tended suburban backyard with its flower beds and shaded patio. These are our modern versions of the pleasance. They are the personal, enclosed spaces where we seek to create our own small pockets of beauty, order, and tranquility. The deep and persistent human need for a protected space of aesthetic delight, a place that nourishes the soul, is a direct inheritance from the creators of the very first pleasure gardens. Beyond these tangible legacies of food, medicine, and design, there is a deeper, more philosophical legacy. It is the idea of the garden as a sanctuary, not just from physical danger, but from the stresses and anxieties of the world. In the medieval period, the garden wall protected its inhabitants from the very real threats of warfare, banditry, and the untamed wilderness. In our modern world, the walls of our gardens serve a different, but no less important, purpose. They protect us from a different kind of wilderness, the wilderness of constant noise, of information overload, of the relentless demands of a digital, hyper-connected world. The act of gardening itself remains one of the most powerful forms of therapy and meditation available to us. To plunge one's hands into the cool earth is a profoundly grounding act. It reconnects us to the physical world, to the fundamental realities of soil, water, and sun. The slow, patient, rhythmic work of the garden, the gentle repetition of weeding, watering, and pruning, has a deeply calming effect on the mind. It pulls us out of the anxious, forward-looking state of our daily lives and places us firmly in the present moment. The timescale of a garden is a powerful antidote to the frantic pace of modern life. A garden does not respond to our impatient demands. It operates on its own, ancient schedule, the slow turning of the seasons, the patient unfurling of a leaf, the gradual ripening of a fruit. To work in a garden is to learn the virtue of patience, to align oneself with a rhythm that is deeper and more enduring than our own. The medieval garden was a testament to resilience, a demonstration of how, even in a world defined by hardship, violence, and uncertainty, people could find ways to cultivate life, beauty, and hope. This lesson is perhaps its most enduring legacy of all. The garden teaches us that order can be created from chaos, that life can emerge from dormant ground, and that even after the harshest of winters, the spring will always return. It is a place of constant renewal, a reminder that even the smallest of seeds contains within it the promise of a future harvest. And so, we see that these gardens are not lost. They have simply transformed. They have broken free from their stone enclosures and have spread their seeds throughout our world. They live on in our allotments and our community gardens, in our herbal remedies and our life-saving medicines, in our public parks and our private backyards. They live on in the very human desire to cultivate a small piece of the earth, to watch something grow, to create a space of peace and beauty. They live on as a quiet but persistent reminder that our history is not just a story of kings and battles, of power and politics. It is also a story of the quiet, patient, and essential work of cultivating the earth. It is the story of the unseen gardeners, whose legacy is not written in chronicles, but is echoed in the soil itself, a living memory that continues to nourish us in countless ways. As the first faint light of a new day begins to touch the world outside your window, let the story of these gardens settle in your mind. They are a testament to the enduring, life-affirming partnership between humanity and the natural world. They are a symbol of hope, of resilience, and of the profound peace that can be found in the simple, honest work of the soil. The gardeners are gone, the walls have long since crumbled, but the spirit of their creation, the echo of their life's work, remains with us still. Carry the deep peace of these ancient, quiet gardens with you into your waking day. If you have found rest and tranquility in this long journey through the quiet corridors of the past, consider returning to this channel for more stories from history's forgotten corners. There are many more worlds to explore, many more silent histories waiting to be heard. Subscribe to continue these journeys, to find a sanctuary of calm in a busy world. For now, there is nothing more to do, nothing more to see, simply rest. Rest in the knowledge that even the most deeply buried of things can find a way to live on. Rest easy now, and carry the profound and quiet peace of the garden with you.